Right.
I'm just talking about research.
Okay, okay.
Could you repeat what you just said?
Yeah, I'm not suggesting that you open an account with Abe and try to sell your books on Abe, because, I mean, that gets complicated pretty fast.
That's why we came to you.
Yeah, and
We were looking at
you
that.
have to answer emails, you have to deal with questions about the books.
Exactly.
Half the time, they're crazy questions,
Right,
and you probably don't want to go there.
yeah,
But you can use the listings that are there to research your book.
okay,
But just remember that those are asking prices from dealers.
right.
It doesn't mean they sold it for that.
Nor how long it's been on that site.
That's right,
Yeah.
yeah. And typically, what I do when I'm listing, I have an account with Abe, so when I'm listing on Abe, if I look up this book, and let's say there's 6 copies out there, and I find maybe 1 or 2 of them are just beat up, and that I don't want to compare with them. But I try to find comparable condition, and then if 3 of them are comparable condition, and they're $40, $50, and $60, then I figure if I'm gonna list my book, I've gotta be under 40, because I want the public to buy my book.
Got it,
So I'm gonna list it for 35.
got it.
If, you know, I try to be a little below the lowest price out there for a comparable condition book.
Okay. Thank you.
This book, have y'all heard of the term arts and crafts, the arts and crafts period?
Movement, yes.
The arts and crafts period was actually a philosophy, and it started in the latter 1800s, and industrialization and mechanization were taking the human touch out of furniture or jewelry or books or whatever you have. And so there was a movement against that. They didn't, you know, the idea of something being handmade was disappearing. And the arts and crafts movement wanted to restore the idea of the handmade piece of furniture or whatever. And so the leader in handmade books was Roycrofters. And this is marked in the back that it's published by Roycrofters. And their books are quite plentiful. Typically, I mean, you can look this up. This is the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam. I had a brother who got a doctorate in literature from Oxford, and so he was a literary guru, and he said this is the greatest poem ever written. And so, some of the Roycrofters books are numbered, like this is number 14 out of 100. Some of them are signed by Elbert Hubbard, who was the founder of the publishing house. This has neither of those. So the odds are pretty strong this is a nothing book. Even though it looks special, the odds are pretty strong it's a nothing book.
I think we have another one of those in the box marked fragile.
They are very fragile. Actually, this one is in better condition than average, believe it or not. So, okay, this one's real easy. It's published by Grosset and Dunlap. There are a certain number of publishers, and I should try to find a list for you, that are called republishers. They don't do first editions. So any Zane Grey book by Grosset and Dunlap has no value.
Okay.
It's never a first. Now, exception, I said there's always exceptions. The exception is if you have one of the real cool dust jackets with the cowboy swinging his lariat, you know, and stuff. I mean, the dust jacket can make it a little bit valuable. But just the book by Grosset and Dunlap is not value. And almost every book by Grosset and Dunlap is of no value, except, there's always an exception, they did first editions of the Hardy Boys and Nancy Drew.
Oh, I remember, I had some of those.
Yeah. So if you have first editions of Hardy Boys or Nancy Drew, those are valuable, especially if they have the dust jackets. But almost every other book by Grosset and Dunlap is of no value.
And would they say, would they say first edition even though they're a republisher?
No, they usually don't say first edition
okay.
unless it's a mistake. There are books that do say first edition that are mistakes, they're not. But I think Gossip Dunlap was pretty careful not to say that.
Okay.
Meriwether Girls in Quest of Treasure. Now, this is by Goldsmith Publishing, and this is a very good book to look at, because Goldsmith is another republisher. Their books are never first editions, except youth series books like Hardy Boys, Nancy Drew. This is a series called The Meriwether Girls. And so there's a chance that it's a first edition. It does not have the dust jacket, and it's in rough condition. So if this were mine, I wouldn't bother with it. It's very unlikely that it's a first edition, and it's just probably not worth pursuing.
So that stack you have going, those 3 books are not worth.
Yeah, this is research. This is put them out for $2 or whatever you sell them for.
Thank you.
Got it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
If we can get $2 there.
I tell you what, this is so informative already,
Yeah.
isn't it?
Well, good.
It's amazing, you know?
Okay, The World of Pooh.
That map is very popular that's in front.
Yeah. Winnie the Pooh came out in the 20s, and this edition came out in the 50s.
Okay.
So this is not going to be of special value. The Oregon Trail, in the first half of the 20th century, it was real popular to do books with an illustration that it's a full cover paste down. And some of them are very pretty, but they are very seldom. Yeah, this is Winston. This is not the first edition. It says the illustrations are copyrighted 1931 by John Winston. But I think the book, Oregon Trail, Francis Parkman, is earlier than 31, I'm almost positive. But I'm gonna leave you this book, you can have it. This helps you identify first editions, and it's by publisher. So I'm gonna look up Winston. I think they were mostly a republisher also. John C. Winston. And now, after the, I wish I could show you all this. After the publisher's name, it says in capital letters, NAP or FE. NAP, to find out what the initials mean, you look on the back page. And NAP means no additional printings are indicated in the book. And FE means it says first edition. So the policy at the Winston Publishing Company was either to say first edition or to have no other printings. In other words, if they did a second printing, they would state the second printing. So if there's no other printing stated, it's probably a first. So there are no other printings indicated here. So this is probably Winston's first edition, but that's not the first edition of the Oregon Trail. So you might look it up. I doubt if it has much value, but you can look it up and see what other people are selling it for.
Wish I could do that easily now. Our internet is not best here always.
No.
So,
Yeah, you can
on a
use
computer
A
it works
or
better
other
sometimes.
booksellers. but-
Okay, we'll use
It's
it.
pretty fast, especially if you have the ISBN number. It
Yes,
goes really fast.
yes. I don't know if we, yeah.
Okay, this is Body, Boots, and Breeches by Harold W. Thompson, and it's by Lippincott. That's a good publisher.
Okay.
So the first thing I always do is look at the title page and the copyright page. And the copyright page says copyright 1939. The title page says 1940. And so the odds are very strong this is not a first edition. Although once in a while, they got the copyright on December 29th, and they published it on January 10th, and so there's a 1-year difference sometimes. But fortunately for us, it also says on the copyright page, 6th impression. So that means, now, some book dealers, and I consider this nearly unethical, some book dealers would say, first edition, and then you read the fine print and it says 6th impression. Well, collectors want the first impression. So it's misleading to, I mean, to the publisher, yeah, this is a first edition, 6th impression. But to the collector, it's a 6th impression. So it's almost certainly not of value. Young Dr. Kildare. Now, see, Max Brand was a popular writer, and things that are associated to movies or television, you know, Dr. Kildare used to be a TV show, so sometimes those are valuable. But the publisher is Gross and Dunlap. So we know it's not a first edition. The next question we ask, is there a cool dust jacket? Well, no, there's not. It's too warm.
It was.
At one time it was a cool dust jacket. And if this were a bright, crisp dust jacket, we'd probably look it up. And when you look it up, you have to make sure you put Gross and Dunlap in there. Because if you went to whoever did the first edition, it might be in the hundreds of dollars. Let's see if, yeah, see, the copyright is held by Dodd, Mead and Company. So the first edition would be with Dodd, Mead. And, but don't, when you look it up, don't compare it to a Dodd, Mead edition. That's going to be more expensive.
It is complicated.
It is.
It is, but you get used to it, and the more you do it, you end up making some educated guesses,
Yeah,
you know?
we'll get better at it.
Yeah. The Jolly Twister.
Interesting. And pages.
Like most children's books, this one's in tough condition. And it is by Sailfield. Normally Sailfield was a republisher, but most republishers did some children's books or youth books that were really first editions. So I'm going to look up, see what they say about Sailfield. I think there's a chance this is a first edition, but because of its condition, that's not going to be real helpful, but just for information's sake, let's look it up. Well, it's not in here. This book has most.
What book is that you're looking at?
It's called A Pocket Guide for Identification of First Editions by McBride.
He's graciously agreed to leave that with us so that we can check ourselves when we're sorting.
So I'm gonna say, I think this is a first edition. Its condition is tough, and so it's probably of no value. But it can't hurt to look it up. I mean, it doesn't take a minute on Abe. You just look it up, Jolly Twisters, publisher, Sailfield, and see what they say. And now, one thing I do, and the more you get accustomed to this, you'll be more comfortable with this. I see the story is written by Harriet Boyd. I've never heard of her. The illustrations are done by Corinne Bailey. I've never heard of her. So if you get a famous illustrator, then you're more inclined to look it up.
Like Wyeth or something, he's illustrated a lot.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
My father was an illustrator.
Oh, really?
He used to illustrate books for Pacific Press.
Uh-huh.
And when Agua, who works here, had a book that he had illustrated that she showed me that I'd never seen before.
Yeah.
And she had promised it to someone, so went online and I went to A Books and I ordered that, and when I got it, the illustrations were by somebody else. It was a different edition.
Oh, my.
Well, that's not unusual. A book comes out, you know, like one of the authors I would do a lot with is George MacDonald.
Yes.
And, but over time, there were different illustrators for his books. At first, both he and his son disliked the first illustrator a lot. And so they made sure that when next editions came out, the publisher didn't use that same illustrator. So, and then over time, that illustrator dies. You know, I mean, he was publishing in the late 1800s, so there have been many different illustrators for him. Jubilee. This is a Civil War novel.
I think that was a movie, wasn't it?
That was
I think
what?
that was a movie.
Was it?
An old movie, yeah.
Yeah. It's published by Doubleday. And this says first edition, and I can confirm it's a first edition because the copyright date and the date on the title page are the same.
They match.
Wow.
So I'm sure this is a first edition. So I would suggest you just look it up and see if first editions of this book, and fortunately, on fiction, the dust jackets are really important. And you've got a pretty decent dust jacket here. So it's worth looking up to see what first editions in dust jacket are selling for.
That should be put aside.
Yeah, we
We've
have
got a
it,
pile.
that's our keeper file.
Yeah, those are the ones
These
that
are
are,
sell out in the book room.
yeah,
Someplace.
I don't know if anybody's gonna buy that one.
Someplace.
They might.
Okay, this is A Treasury of Stephen Foster, published by Random House. And on the copyright page, it says first printing. So that's pretty definite.
Okay.
I believe them, you know, I believe this is first printing also means first edition.
Is that the same as a first impression? Is an impression the same as a
The
print?
terminology gets crazy on this stuff.
Yeah.
Generally, it's the same as a first impression.
Okay.
Yeah. First printing, first impression, probably the same thing. So this is worth looking up. I've seen this book a lot. My gut feel is the first impression won't be worth much. Because I think, you know, if they printed a gazillion first editions, that means there's a lot of them out there. And so they're not valuable. And I think that's where you're gonna be on this one. But it's a first edition with dust jackets, so it's worth looking up. Prayers from the Ark. Y'all like Far Side cartoons? I was looking at some Far Side cartoons just a couple days ago. And here's Noah, and he's building an ark. And God is speaking from the heavens. I said, ark! This is Viking Press. Viking Press is one of the tougher ones because they don't like to say first edition. And so you have to get a little bit more sophisticated with them. But fortunately back here it says 9th printing, 1963. So we're gonna set that aside. Inside the Cup. This is not the British, what do you
Prime
think?
Minister.
Prime Minister. This is not that Winston Churchill, it's a different one.
Really?
I don't know.
So,
Oh, my. I
So-
did look at it, too.
okay, this says copyright 1912 and 13 by Hearst's Magazine, and then copyright 1913 by Macmillan, and then over here it says 1913 on the title page. So this is a first edition. A lot of books were in magazines first, and then they became a book. So this is a first edition of the book. it's, because of its condition, I'm gonna suggest you don't even look it up, but you are welcome to if you like. And here's another one, Richard Carville, by the same non-Winston. I think the famous Winston Churchill usually is stated as Winston S. Churchill. I'm not positive of that, but I think so. And this is Macmillan, 1899. Oops, but reading the fine print on the copyright page, it says copyright 1899, and they put 1899 on the front, on the title page, but the fine print says, set up May 1899, reprinted June 4 times, July 3 times, August 3 times, all in 1899. So this is like the 12th edition or
Not
something
even
like
past that.
that. So we're gonna pass on
They're
that.
sneaky.
So here's Churchill, and let's see if it says Winston S. Yeah, it does, Winston S. Churchill.
Okay.
Boy, this is tough. These books are definitely more valuable if they have dust jackets, but most of the time when I see them, they don't have dust jackets. It's Houghton Mifflin. It has 1948 on the title page and 1948 as the copyright. That's pretty good. But then it says Riverside Press. That's a press of Houghton Mifflin, Cambridge, Massachusetts. Printed in the United States. And then underneath that, there's a W. That makes me think, well, did they start with A and B and C? And I don't know the answer to that, but you're gonna see Houghton Mifflin from 1891 to 1953, SD. SD means same date. You can look on the back. It means the same date on the copyright page and the title page. So we've got that. And then after 1953, they stated first edition. So that still leaves me wondering about that crazy W. But I don't know. I would say look it up, just to see if anybody selling it knows what the W means. And this one might
What's
be.
the title for that one?
This one is The Gathering Storm, and this is The Grand Alliance, part of the same series.
Okay.
And this one has 1950 on the title page, 1950 on the copyright page,
353.
and at the bottom, there's no W or A or anything else. So that makes me even more suspicious of the W over here. And this one, I think that looks like a first edition, 1950 on both of them. But you can also know that in 1950, right after World War II, when Houghton Mifflin published this, they published a bunch of them. So this is not going to be rare. But still, it might be a first edition, and it might be $20. I don't know. So now, of course, y'all have to keep in mind that people going to a Friends of the Library play, they're expecting a lottery. So if the cheapest one on the internet is 20 and Stan Shelley would price it 15, Friends of the Library better price it $7.50 or something like that.
And then postage is gonna be that much or more.
Yeah.
Because I mailed a letter today and it was 9 something.
For a letter?
Certified
Actually, I have a
mail.
copy of this book at home.
A Child's Book of Hymns is beautifully illustrated. Illustrated by Masha. I vaguely have heard that. It's by Random House, and it just says copyright 1945, and it does not say, according to this, it's supposed to be the same date, but there's no date on the front, and so I don't think this is a first edition. A Child's Book of Prayers. Looks like they're part of a same series. Oops, here's a book within a book. Random House. And they don't have a copyright page, so they put the copyright here. But they don't have a title page date, they just have a copyright. So I don't think that's a first either. Now, but I'm gonna look at this. This book was inside that one.
Yeah.
The Fisherman and the Goldfish.
Watch that one be the valuable one.
Yeah.
Pushkin, he's very famous. It's published by the Foreign Languages Publishing House, Moscow. But there's no date, no information.
Is it English?
It's in English, yes, so it's been translated. If this were in better condition, I would look it up, but it's got water damage, so I probably wouldn't bother with it. Peter Rabbit. Giant treasure. We know this is not a first edition. When it says it's a treasury of things, then we know that it's. Yeah, this was published in 1980. So,
Peter Rabbit.
It was written long before 1980.
oh, yeah, sure was, yeah. So the only hope you would have is if this is illustrated by somebody famous, and this is the first edition with that person's illustrations. But it doesn't say anything to that effect. Normally, in that case, if it were a famous illustrator, and this is the first one, it would say illustrations copyrighted, and they would be copyrighted too, so. Memoirs of Colonel Hutchinson. The nice thing about books is they're endless. Every day you look at books, you see a book you've never heard of.
Really? There's no end.
Do you go around to different libraries doing this?
I have done it a little bit in Hendersonville, but mostly one-on-one. They have one person that does the sorting.
Oh,
And
thank you. I
And
didn't
you were on
expect
the
you.
board of that library and the Friends Board, right?
I was on the Board of Trustees for 16 years, and then the Friends Board for 3 or 4 years. Okay, this says at the bottom of the page, 1902, printed, published by George Bell and Sons. But on the copyright page, it says reprinted from the stereotype plates. So if it says reprinted, we're done. O Genteel Lady by Esther Forbes. Published by Houghton Mifflin. And over here, it came from the Timrod Library, Somerville, South Carolina. That means it's what we would call an ex-library book. And collectors generally don't want ex-library books. If they're collecting a book that the first edition is $5,000 and they can get an ex-library book for $1,000, yeah, they'll take it. But it's a compromise. I'm just gonna check what Houghton, I know I looked up Houghton Mifflin, but I wanna be sure.
So our called books from the library, then that means that we really need to,
Bother.
bother with those in terms of value.
Yeah,
Well, and people don't even want to buy them if they're up to date
Isn't that
books, if they're
interesting?
coupled.
Yeah, yeah.
We'll run with those.
yeah.
If something's out of print, I get it from I get a library edition, because you want
Sure,
a copy of the book.
yeah.
Yeah.
And then, there's two different markets, actually, there's probably three markets. But the primary two markets are collectors or readers. And they don't overlap too much. A lot of collectors, if they have an expensive collectible copy of a book, they'll buy a reading copy to read. Because they don't wanna damage the collectible copy. Yeah. And then there's a third category that I would call research copies, where somebody's buying a book about the history of Tryon or something like that. They're buying it, not, yes, they're gonna read it, but they're buying it for research. And there's quite a bit, especially in the realm of science or books, government books full of statistics. Those kind of things are purchased for research sometimes. So this is Houghton Mifflin, and it does not have a date on the title page. Yeah, see, and it says from 1891 to 1953, which is inclusive of this date. It should either have same date, title page and copyright page, but there's no date on the title page, so we didn't meet that criteria. Or it should say first edition, and it doesn't say that. So it doesn't meet either of the criteria to be a first edition. So we'll put that
Old
away.
book.
So Stan,
Just a good old book, yeah.
can you explain, I remember when we first met, and I brought that Miracle on 34th Street book, and it said first edition, 1937, I think, and we were so excited. And then you said, well, but there's this dot on the back of the book.
Yep,
Remember that?
yeah.
So-
Book club editions are very,
Book club editions, that's
there's
it.
there's like 100 different book clubs,
Yeah.
and they have different rules. But the big one, the Book of the Month Club is the big one. And most of their life, they would put a dot on the lower right corner of the back cover.
So ours had a dot, is that correct, Karen?
It's just a little incised dot, it's not, once in a while it's a black dot, but it's usually just impressed circle. Now, to make it complicated, Bonzoy Books stamps their logo down there. And it's impressed, just like the Book of the Month Club. So, Bonzoy, don't think it's a Book of the Month Club if you see that. And there's lots of other rules about book clubs. When we get to some with a dust jacket, I'll talk about that. Because what there are a group of clues that a book is a Book of the Month Club book. And most Book of the Month Club books have no value. There's very few exceptions. If you take the greatest books of the 20th century, the best example I can think of is To Kill a Mockingbird. The first book club edition is worth $100, but that's really rare. That's really rare. This is Golden Treasury of Natural History. Most books, Golden Treasure of Poems and this thing, they're generally of no value. Yeah, there's lots of different dates. There's no date on the front, so we're gonna set that aside. Abraham Lincoln, The Prairie Years in 2 volumes. So this is Carl Sandburg. This is volume 1, but apparently they printed both volumes in the same book. The Prairie Years is 2 volumes. When it first came out, there were 6 volumes, 4 for the war years and 2 for the prairie years. And it looks to me like they put volume 1 and 2 together in this printing. See if I can find a spot that says volume 2. No. At any rate, we know it's a reprint because the first printings were 6 different books. And in this area, You always look to see if it's autographed, because Sandberg autographed pretty freely, and he just lived right up the street. I can remember when I was a teenager, there was a bookstore in Hendersonville called Barber's Bookstore, and I could go in there, and there would be stacks of Carl Sandburg books, all signed. And when they ran out, they'd just drive out to Flat Rock and get him to sign some more. And so, there's a lot of them around. Will Rogers. By P.J. O'Brien. This says copyright 1925. And there's no date on the title page, which makes me think it's probably, and it doesn't even say who the publisher is.
So that makes you think it's a reprint?
Yeah, I do, because on the back it says copyright by the author. Copyright in Great Britain and in the British dominions and provinces. If he self-published this, self-published books generally don't have a big printing for their first edition. So I would look this up, because if he self-published this, he may have only printed 5,000 copies or something, and now it might be a rare book. It's worth looking it up. Let me just see if there's anything in the back.
What's the date that they did give?
Was it 1935.
Okay.
Persons and places, George Santiago, Lanier Library, so it's ex-library. But George Santiago is an important figure. Oops, the best clue we can have. The Book of the Month Club sent a little flyer with every book they sold and or delivered, you know. So some people cut them out and paste them in the book like this. So we know this is a Book of the Month Club, and I don't see the dot. So this may have been before they started putting the dot there. But at any rate, we know it's Book of the Month Club. This is Modern Library. Modern Library is a marvelous series. The idea in the beginning, they started I think in 1917, the idea was to make great literature available in inexpensive, small versions, so that people could read them on subways, and they could put them in their purse or whatever. So there's people that just collect Modern Library. So if you have a first printing of a Modern Library book, even though it's not the first edition of the book, it might be valuable, because there's people that collect just first printings of Modern Library books. And another exception, probably 96 or 97% of Modern Library books say first printing, but there's a few that don't. And there's a wonderful website for Modern Library, and it gets like ultra detailed. I mean, you've got to become an expert in Modern Library to understand the website. And there's a book called Taladano, and he numbers that he would, this is book number 164. But when this came out the first time, they may have had 2 previous 164s that they discontinued.
Oh.
So Taladano made this book, and so he calls the first one 164A, the second one 164B, and this one might be 164C, and then he tells you how they identified first editions of that. And one of the ways you identify first editions is by looking inside the dust jacket at the number of books in the series. So Taladano would tell you if 393 is the correct number for the first edition dust jacket. And I'm pretty certain it's not, because they don't say first edition on the copyright page. The older ones have different bindings, and Taladano labels all the bindings, you know, there's the first, sixth, seventh. This is about the 8th or 9th different binding that Modern Library used. But I know that by this time they were stating first edition all the time. So this is not a first edition, first Modern Library edition. And Pensie's was written, what, in the 1700s? So we know it's not a first edition.
No,
So are the frontispiece, you know, inside, do they always look like that for Modern Library? Because the
They quit
inside-
doing this sometime, I don't know, in 70s, 80s, something like
Right.
that. But they did this for decades.
Okay.
In the dust jacket, they put the number. They didn't start right away in 1917, they started in the 20s sometime.
Okay.
Those very first books, 1917 up to sometime in the 20s, they had a page inside the book that said, other titles available in the Modern Library series. So when you look in Toledano, he says, if the ad in the front of the book lists 23 books, then you got a first edition. And that's how you know it.
So the end papers, do they always look like that for Modern Library?
The end papers?
Yes.
No,
Oh, really? Okay.
Toledano covers that too.
Okay.
And he's got end sheets number 1, end sheets number 2. And
Okay.
they've got probably 6 or 7 different end sheets that they used.
Okay.
It's a whole
It's
world
complex.
unto itself.
it
Yeah.
sounds like it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if we find Modern Library books, what's your advice?
If it says first printing on the title page,
Mhm.
then you may have something,
Okay.
especially if you have a dust jacket. And also, collectors like some of the dust jackets, not very many, have really nice illustrations on it, particularly Art Deco illustrations. And if you've got a first printing in a jacket with an illustration, you may really have something. You may be in the hundreds of dollars.
Okay.
The Case of the Horrified Heirs by Earl Stanley Gardner, Perry Mason.
Yeah, Betty. Cynthia, oh, there, I was gonna say, if Cynthia was here, she could tell you. But she is here. You're just out of my line of vision.
Okay, it has 1964 as the copyright date, and no date on the title page, so I'm guessing it's not a first edition, but I'm gonna look up the publisher, William Morrow, and see.
So our first step really is look for the copyright and the date on the title and see if those match. Is that right?
Yeah,
Am I getting-
Yeah.
am I gathering that?
that's what I wrote down.
That's a real good
That's
start.
the first start, okay.
It says up to 1973, no additional printings. So it doesn't say anything about a date on the title page, and we don't have any additional printings, so that means we might have a first edition here. And if it didn't have a dust jacket, I'd say I don't bother with it,
Mhm.
because Perry Mason books, you know, they print a lot of them. But we've got a dust jacket and we've got a maybe first edition, so it's worth looking on the internet to see what you find out there. Blue Held by Derek Gilchrist, Heath Cranton. It says first published 1943, second impression December 1943. So it's not a first edition, it's a second edition. If this were a famous book, sometimes a second printing can be worth something. But it's not a famous book, so I think we should pass on it. Gulliver's Travel. I just sold a real early, it wasn't first, but it was like 3rd or 4th edition of Gulliver's Travels.
Wow.
And it was $1,000 being even a 3rd or 4th edition.
Oh, my goodness. Are you a collector and a reader?
I collect very little. I really like Larry McMurtry. And
Oh,
so
really?
I collect delirium and mercury, and I have almost every first edition, and most of them are autographed. And
Oh,
stuff
my.
like that. So.
Dr. Carmeyer?
This is published by Goldsmith Publishing.
Yeah,
And
you said, talked about.
Goldsmith is a republisher,
Oh.
and we know this is not a first.
So if you see Goldsmith, just, yeah,
Keep going.
Yeah.
forget
Well,
it.
Goldsmith and also, what was the other one?
Uh,
Gross and Dunlop.
Grass and Dunn, yeah.
Yep.
I thought I had written grass and Dunn.
Yeah, no, that'll
Let me just
find
make
it.
that O.
That'll
Well.
help us find it, but, I mean, those are two really excellent clues
Yeah.
for us when we're sorting.
Okay. Heidelin von Solomon Gessner. And as I read the publisher, Gustav Kuiper Verlag, this is either German or Welsh. It looks a little bit like Welsh to me. But it's really hard to sell foreign books. There's not even a copyright page. My guess is it's nothing. I'm gonna put it over here, but if y'all wanna do a little research on it, you can, but they're tough. The foreign language books, they're tough to research and they're tough to sell.
Yeah, I'm sure so.
Acres of Diamonds,
Oh, I have that one.
Russell Conwell. He wrote this book and it sold so well, and he went around the country during the period where they paid people big bucks to give speeches. And he made so much money, he started one of the Northeastern University, I think it's Temple University.
Oh, really?
He started with the money he made from this book,
Huh. He did make
And-
a lot of money.
his lectures. This says copyright 1935, K-Z. Harper is kind of difficult sometimes to work with.
Is there something on the title page?
Mhm.
Is there a date on the title page?
Yeah, that's 1915,
Oh,
and it's Harper and Brothers. Up to 1911, same date, 1912 through April 1922, a two-letter code appears on the copyright page. The first edition shows PU and then the dates on the copyright page, with the code matching the month and year of when it was published. So this does not have the PU, it just has the date code. So I'm assuming from that it's not a first edition, because it says first editions show PU, and then open parentheses, M, comma, Y, close parentheses. So but this is such an important book. I would probably look up, I mean, if you look in Wikipedia when he wrote this, if it says 1915, then you want to investigate further. I think he wrote it before that. But it's an important book, and you don't want to miss a first edition of something like this. But I don't think it's a first. Goodbye to Uncle Tom. Okay, I'm gonna pass this around so that y'all can see the Book of the Month Club dot
okay.
in the lower right-hand corner. Thank you.
Oh, that's a tiny one.
It's little.
Yeah, it looks like somebody a little tiny punch.
That's exactly what the Miracle on 34th Street looked like.
Oh, really?
Yeah. It was like,
Oh, is that?
It's pretty little, isn't it?
It's- Yeah, I mean, unless you were looking for it, you wouldn't see it.
That's right, you're exactly right.
You have to be looking, actually actively looking for it.
yeah, it is impressed, isn't it?
Mhm.
Ours had gold in it, and probably gold has been,
Worn off.
yeah, worn off.
Okay, this is Harcourt Brace. This is Babbitt by Sinclair Lewis, very important book. May have won the Pulitzer. So,
I know we had to read it.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. I
It
had
says
that in college.
copyright 1922,
Bandit?
and then below that it says 1.8.56, which looks like a date. So I just want to see what Harcourt's policy was for showing first editions. This doesn't look old enough to be from the 20s. It looks more like a book from the 50s.
Yeah, the publisher, the printing methods.
And even the difference in the paper,
Uh-huh,
once you look at a film, you can tell that.
yeah.
You're right, it's Temple. It has Inspiration for the University's Mission was his book, The Acres of Diamonds.
Oh,
Yeah, I was just looking it up.
was it Temple?
Yeah, it's Temple.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Does it say when the book was published?
No, I'm finding that.
Okay.
Yeah. Thanks.
Wow, the Harcourt Brace has all kinds of different rules from different periods, but it says up to 1926, no additional printings. Well, there are no additional printings, but there's that weird date. So I just feel real sure this is not a book from the 20s, so just doesn't have that look. So I'm gonna go by that 1956 date and say this is a reprint. Ah, nice big books. Rome.
Yeah, gosh knows what's gonna fly out when you open it.
Yeah,
Cambridge does.
but they can be beautiful.
Yeah, some of the bindings. Do you find books with marble end papers, you know, marbleized, what's that called, that part? The
This is
face.
marbleized end sheets.
Right, but then also there's marbling that happens right here.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so.
Well, there's a couple clues here. Number one, it's 1875, and in the late 1800s, before TV or movies or anything, people learned about the world through books. And illustrated books were very, very popular, and sometimes they were very nicely done, like this one's nicely done. It's published by Appleton. They did a lot of these nice big books. But it says, with an introduction by W.W. Story, new edition revised and abridged. I don't like to see that, because that means there was a previous edition. But nonetheless, just based on the beauty of the book and the illustrations in it, I would definitely look this up on Abe.
What
and
is the
see.
name of that?
It's called Rome by Francis Way, or W.Y.
R-O-M-E.
345 engravings. So this is definitely worth looking up. It's a beautiful book. Even though we know it's not a first, it's worth looking up. Boydell Shakespeare Gallery. This is, Boydell's illustrations of Shakespeare are pretty common. But this is another one of those beautifully illustrated books. The Merry Wives of Windsor. So, let's see what... I just about thought we didn't have a title page, and a book without a title page is worthless.
Okay.
That's interesting.
But there is a title page, The Gallery of Illustrations for Shakespeare's Dramatic Works by John Boydell, published by Gebbie and Barry Publishers in Philadelphia. Now, a book like this it's less important whether it's a first edition, because it's just such a beautiful book, and it's illustrated, and it has value as a book, not necessarily as a first edition. It's got all these Boydell famous illustrations, so it's definitely worth looking to see what people on Abe are asking for it. There's some condition problems with smears. I saw a little section where a little bit of water damage had happened.
I saw something just pop out when you were to part of it, just like a little.
Oh, yeah, yeah. But, and the cover is coming off, but somebody might be willing to recover this. If both covers were coming off and it were just in terrible shape on the outside, there are people who would take the beautiful illustrations and frame them and sell them in their antique mall, stuff like that. So that's definitely worth looking at. Here's another one. All of these are nicely illustrated books, and it doesn't really matter if they're first editions. Look at that.
Looks like the same publisher, because they've got the
Same paper?
same wallpaper, why I keep calling it wallpaper.
Well, this one's Appleton, the first one was Appleton, and this one's Appleton. It's got the marbleized end sheets and the gilt page edges. This is a book about Italy from the 1880s, and great illustrations. Color illustrations are definitely better than black and white. This one, it appears they're all black and white, but it's still, I'm sure it's worth something. So you can look
When
it
you
up.
say worth something, see, this is, Stan, where we're struggling, you know. By the time we list and, you know, I mean, you're in the business of this, we're not, obviously. And is it in the end worth something for us to take the time to, or to pay someone to do you see what I'm saying? In other words, how do we do it?
What I mean by worth something is, in the area where you are selling books,
Yes,
have a couple bookcases for better books.
okay,
And
okay.
if the cheapest one, this is roughly very good condition. So
Okay.
if you find several very good condition ones, and the cheapest one is $40, then if I were you, I'd mark it 20, because then a dealer that sees it, you know, and dealers do come and look at your book.
Oh, they do.
And
Okay.
then, you know, but you want it to be cheap enough that a dealer's gonna be interested.
I see. So looking it up on ABE books is not necessarily saying we're gonna sell it there.
No,
It's
no,
more
no,
just
no.
sort
You're-
of knowing how to price it.
You're just using that marketplace
Perfect.
to
Okay.
get information.
Good. And it just made me nervous because I'm thinking, we went that route, we tried that,
Oh, it's work.
and we're not, that's not our job, and
No,
so, yeah.
Actually, Hendersonville does that, and I think it's a mistake.
Really,
They
we
don't-
noticed they do that, yeah.
Yeah, I go and look online and I
Amazon.
look at their listings, and it's clear they don't know anything about books, to be honest.
Right.
And
right.
it comes across in their listing. And so most people that know books would be afraid to buy from these people because they don't know what they're listing.
That's encouraging, Stan, because we thought, oh, how should we go about doing this book?
Right, and that was before we realized we didn't have very many
Yeah,
more.
yeah, right, well, and you know,
But this
this is
is
good.
great
This is
here.
informative.
Yeah,
I mean,
and
so
and this would be
Yeah,
a
and
drawing card too.
Yeah.
If you run across something and you look it up on, hey, this is a $500 book or something like that, then I would call 2 or 3 dealers, get them to make offers and take the highest offer.
Really?
Yeah.
Are you a dealer?
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, I'm
Well,
always
we-
interested.
We'd call you before we call anybody
Yeah,
else.
It would give you a deal
Seriously.
too.
But actually, you're telling us what it's worth.
Yeah, you want to be careful. I mean, you don't want the same person telling you what it's worth and then he says, I'll write you a check. You know, you want to be
I
careful.
see. Well, we'll do our homework.
Yeah. Just for your information,
I think we used to use Mr. Goodhart.
uh,
Goodhart books in Triumph, he passed away.
Right,
Yeah.
who did the Lemire, and that's who referred
That's
us
who
to,
referred us.
to to Stan, actually, because you worked with Lanier and Jenny Pertell.
Yeah, I did,
Yes,
yeah.
okay.
And just for your information, most book dealers and the book dealer literature says that books turn over so slowly in a bookstore that they recommend that you pay 1/3 of what you're gonna sell it for. So if a book is worth $60, they say you should buy it for 20. A dealer should buy it for 20. Now, as you go up, when you get to $1,000 book, most book dealers would say, "Oh, I'll give you more than $330. I'll give you $400 or $500 for that
Right,
book."
right. Hey, Steve, could you tell us the story whenever you have a moment, whenever it's
Yeah.
right? The one that you told me about that tent and the people bringing books, and somebody said, "Oh, this person's got this book," and you said, "No, she doesn't have that book."
That was me, and that was here in
I
Tryon.
know, so tell us that story.
It was, we used to have an auction, and we ran an ad in the Tryon Daily Bulletin. This was back when it was a bigger paper than it is now. It was back, it used to be Tryon residents that spent half the year in Europe. They would send the Tryon Daily Bulletin to Europe.
Oh.
It was a big deal.
25
And
cents.
so we ran an ad in there that we were gonna be at one of the bed and breakfasts. And we were gonna be there for 2 days and bring your antiques and books
When
by.
was this?
This was 10 years ago probably.
Okay.
And we said, bring your stuff by, and I had a good appraiser, she and I, there were 3 of us here, and we had a big turnout, and we had people waiting. And so Joette, my appraiser for jewelry, leaned over to me, and I was working with somebody's books, and Joette said, this lady has a first edition from Francis Bacon. And I said, no, she doesn't. And so we worked a little bit, and then it was her turn. And sure enough, she had a first edition Francis Bacon,
Wow.
which it was very cool. But I was surprised when I researched it. You'd think, gosh, that's thousands of dollars, but actually it was about a $700 book.
Oh.
But it was cool, you know. She knew what she had,
Okay.
and she was really proud when I had to apologize to her.
No way.
Yeah.
That's neat.
This is Westminster Abbey, 1890. Can't tell if it's a first, but it's one of those illustrated books from the late 19th century, and it doesn't matter if it's a first. It does matter, but it can have value not being a first. Some condition problems that'll hurt it, but it's worth looking up for sure. And here's another of those travel books, the Rhine illustrated. I'll bet this might be Appleton again.
I mean,
No, this is Lippincott.
buy that just for the cover.
Yeah,
Oh, that's-
yeah.
She-
And
She's got more. See,
No,
Cynthia
it's
knows these.
I was just gonna push him where he.
Oh,
Oh,
okay.
okay.
Thank you. Thank you. You know which one.
So this is one of those illustrated travel books. Beautiful old book,
My goodness.
and you definitely want to look that up too.
Okay.
Getting a large stack here to look up, but that's good.
Oh, that's good. That's-
Okay, this is probably part of a series, and when you don't have all of a series, that hurts.
Okay.
But I think this is a first edition. It's called The War of the First Year.
Well,
And-
we have more.
More of this one?
Yes, we have all 6, I think.
Okay, good. It's written by somebody named Edgar McGinnis, and I know the World War II writers, and I've never heard of that. So the author's not important, but it's published by Oxford University Press. So back here it says 1945, front says 1945. So I think it's a first edition, and if you've got the rest of the
We have
set,
all 6.
yeah, that's worth looking up.
Okay, good.
Now, when you've got a set, you've got to look at every book to see if the title page date matches the copyright date.
Okay.
Because sometimes you can have a set where 2 or 3 of them are first and 2 or 3 of them aren't.
And it's the same with Winston Churchill's books. We have more of those, so we'll have.
Yes.
Okay, I got you,
Yes,
yeah.
So we'll have to check all of those.
Okay, this is a 2-volume set. Lincoln the President, Volume 1, Volume 2, published by Dodd, 1945 back here. So this is almost certainly a first edition. And the condition's a little rough, and from books in the 20th century, you have a higher standard. You don't like them. If they're from the 1800s and they're a little rough, you think, well, heck, when I'm over 100 years old, I'm going to be a little rough, you know. But nonetheless, it's a. Let's see if the second volume is a first edition also. Yes, it is. So it's worth checking. I'm skeptical that it's going to be worth something, but when they're first editions, it's a good idea to look. John D. McDonald, his books are great. Cinnamon Skin. He wrote up into the 80s, I think.
And these are all ones that you've noticed, it says first
Oh,
edition.
these all say.
This says first
Yes.
edition, and it has, are you familiar with number lines? Should I go over them?
Mhm.
Every publisher does number lines differently, but this one, fortunately, it uses the number line and it says first edition, so there's no question, but you can look at the very bottom.
Oh, here.
It says 82, 83, 84, 85, 86. That's the year. And what they do is they keep the plates for this book. And then if they reprinted in 1987, they just remove the 86. And then it shows that it was printed in 87. And then with this company, on the back end of the number line, going in reverse order, it says 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So since the 1 is there, it's a first edition.
Oh,
When they print the second printing, they remove the 1. So if they did the second printing in 1987, they would remove the 1 from one end, remove the 86 from the other end, and then it would start with 2 and be with 87 over there, and
Interesting. It's on the